Welcome back to the Zero E Michigan podcast. I'm Carl Bloss, and my co-host is.
Larry Hudson.
We have with us today Luke Wilson, who's no stranger to the podcast. So welcome back, Luke.
Thanks, Carl.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, since it's almost Thanksgiving at this recording time, is road trips, holiday road trips. And the last time we talked to Luke, he was already taking road trips, but now he's like a road trip master. And it's not with a Tesla. It's those of you on video, you'll see he has this beautiful red Mustang Mach E. So I wanted to pick his brain a little bit about what some of his planning tools are and how he does successful road trips. And sometimes he comes back proudly with 0% on the guessometer. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So finding DC fast charging, I know that's probably gets talked about a lot, and with Teslas, it's pretty easy. What are your tools that you use for road trip planning?
Yeah, so I usually start with the Ford Pass app just because I'm already in the app looking at the vehicle, what's happening if when it's charging, it tells you the kilowatts that's being received, the kilowatt hours that have been added. And right within there, you can quickly say, hey, go to the trip planner. And you can put in your destination. It already knows the state of charge of your vehicle. And if you were to leave right then, it tells you what would happen. And that's kind of how things would work. If I need to leave right now. But then again, you can adjust some of the parameters and say, hey, I'm leaving in a couple of days. I'll be at 90 or 100% state of charge. What would you recommend? And that's where I start. After that, I sometimes contextualize my results by jumping on a better route planner or ABRP, and then furthermore might jump into PlugShare only because PlugShare gives you the ability to see the user experience and what kind of reports people have been experiencing with the chargers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The Ford Pass app, does it give you live information on chargers, like what's available, what's offline, things like that? Or is it kind of static? Like PlugShare tended to be in the past, but now there's some APIs where some of the networks you can actually see, slightly delayed, I might add, whether or not they're online. How's the Ford Pass app for that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Ford has on the pass. I usually see that if the chargers are in use or not. So of course, it does tend to take you to chargers that their redundancy or there are multiple units available. At least in my experience, after doing half a dozen significant road trips, I haven't had to deal with any wait times. And they've generally been all online.
And does it typically route you to preferentially to any particular network, say Electrify America? I know some cars come with some subscriptions initially, so it's beneficial to use up those kilowatt hours or that time. Is that still the case, or is it pretty much whatever it thinks is available?
Yeah, so there are some limited filter options where you can say, hey, I want preferred selections or certain networks. So again, really similar functionality to third-party applications. But yeah, Ford does prefer Electrify America because they do give promotional charging with them initially. Of course, I've already exhausted that. But I usually just leave all the networks available and just show me what's most efficient. Because if I reduce the number of accessible chargers, based on some, how would I say it, peripheral issue that I have, maybe I just want to avoid that because it's pricey. Well, then you also can avoid some efficiency that you could gain from having access to that charger if your pass allowed you to plan the route that way.
Well, that makes sense. So at this point for Electrify America, you're like any other user. You have to pay. You don't get any additional discounts. You just had some freebie kilowatt hours, and now they're exhausted, and you just have to pay like anybody else. Is that right?
Yeah. So Ford at the time, and I think it's still the same, they offered 250 kilowatt hours of promotional energy, and that could only be used when you activated plug-in charge on the vehicle and added a credit card. And so as you just plugged in, the experience was rather seamless. The handshake, as I've seen other YouTubers report is a little bit longer than that of a supercharger. Um, but it just worked. And then once you're done with the session, um, I can't remember now because it's been almost 2 years, but you would receive an email stating, hey, you received these kilowatt hours and it cost you nothing. But then once I exhausted that and just plugged in, then you would just go to the credit card on file, you'd receive an email about it, and the transaction occurred. So you'd receive a digital receipt in your email.
Yeah, I'm seeing that functionality a bit more now. For example, EVgo, the newer stations, have they call it Auto Charge Plus, but it's plug and charge, where essentially the
Mhm.
first time you register your vehicle, you have to confirm some things, but then
Mhm.
it says, okay, now you're registered on the system, and now you can just plug in. And that includes Teslas, by the way, with the
Mhm.
Tesla branded CCS adapter. So there's a station in Ohio, not too far from Toledo, where I've stopped a couple times now just because they have trailer pull-through sites, and I really like that. Yeah, literally just plug in, start charging just like a supercharger. Yeah, the handshaking takes maybe a little bit longer, but the screen tells you what's going on. So, at least you have this feeling like something's happening, and it's, going towards the direction of goodness. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to say something else.
Oh, I don't quite remember, but the plug and charge feature that you turn on, there's really not that much authentication that occurs. You're just essentially saying, hey, Ford, I authorize you to use my card on file. Let me enter it, and then and go ahead and then you can obviously activate it that way. But you can certainly circumvent that even with that activated if you wish to just use the Electrify America app or whatever third party
Mhm.
app you have.
Yeah, but I mean that
And
that
it,
fe
it
feature is actually pretty nice. Go ahead, Larry.
Mm-hmm.
and it took you 2 years to use up that 250 kilowatts?
No, I used up the 250 kilowatt hours mostly on that first trip. I just said it's been a couple of
Oh,
years
okay.
since I've had to use the promotional or in fact I'll be honest, I haven't used the plug and charge feature for quite some time, only because um, you pay the retail rates, and if you wish to use DC fast charging at a discount, um, typically you would just pay or you'd upgrade your membership with that network at their better promotional rate. But Ford does offer for Electrify America the ability to upgrade that fee, I believe, at an annual rate. So originally, I think it was $50 a year, and then it would reduce the price per kilowatt hour, the unit pricing. I don't know if that's increased, commensurate of the new increase of the monthly pass.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
glad you brought that up because I wanted to point that out for people that want to buy down the rate and they think they're going to do a bunch of travel, let's say during one particular month. So let's say you're
Mhm.
going to go visit grandma across the country and you're going to charge more than a couple times. So the way you would look at that payback, at least on Electrify America, it works this way. You can change it on a month-to-month basis. So by default, you're on the Electrify America pass. So that means you're pay as you go. It's used to be 48 cents per kilowatt hours. I think it still is, but it depends on the location now. And at the time in Michigan, I believe it's still this way. If you get the Pass Plus, so that costs you $7 per month, it buys the rate down to 36 cents per kilowatt hour. So 12 cents per kilowatt hour savings. So if you do the math, divide $7 by 12 cents, that gets you about 58 kilowatt hours, where the break even point comes in. So if you're going to be charging more than that, and I would say that's probably about two charges somewhere in there, maybe even less, 1.5 charges, it's worth it to do that. And then when the next month comes around, you just have to remember, cancel that membership. In fact, you can cancel it immediately, but it's valid for that calendar month until, not calendar month, but that month to month uh, time frame, so that you can still use the lower rate during that time. So that's kind of a neat feature to have. Now, I don't know if EVgo does something similar. I know that they also have different rate plans, but that's something you'd have to look into before you hit the road. Another question for you as a non-Tesla owner. There are quite a few Tesla destination chargers out there. So, and just for the audience to be clear, this is not the Tesla superchargers. These are ones that are essentially level 2, like you would have a home charger, but a lot of hotels have the destination chargers, and you can use that. There's an adapter for that. So is that something that you have, Luke?
I do. There are several different ones on the market. But with your recommendation, I purchased the Tesla Tap Mini. That's, I think, rated for 60 amps.
They have different amp levels.
Mhm.
So, and the price goes up a little bit. So there's a 40, 60, and an 80 amp. And yeah, I personally like that brand. They're a little bit more expensive than some of the off-branded ones. However, I know that they're US made, and I particularly like the Mini because I use it on my Zero motorcycle, and it's very, very compact.
Mhm.
Okay. So, and you've gotten you out of a couple of pickles or helped you get charges at hotels and
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I'd say more than 80% of the time, it's just offered more convenience. So, um, I find it's just it's another tool to have. It is a bit pricey, but you never know when you could use it, and it just creates more opportunity. Just imagine like my toolbox in my garage. You know, you have many different adapters to do different things. Yes, you may not use it very often, but when you do want it, you want to have it.
right. Yep. One of my favorite charging locations is Storm Cloud Brewing up in Frankfurt. And I came in there one time and somebody else was using their single J1772 plug, but the Tesla charger was available. So Tesla Tap Mini to the rescue, started charging. So I
Mhm.
also find it helpful. So it's, yeah, something that I always carry with me on road trips when I'm not driving the Tesla, which obviously then I don't need that. And the Tesla has the opposite J plug
Yeah,
to Tesla adapter as part of the what comes with the car.
yeah.
Um, I did want to offer one cautionary tale. So we have a mutual friend who works for Lucid Motors, and he told a story of someone who bought the 40 amp version. The Lucid has an onboard 80 amp charger, and they were using an 80 amp Tesla charger and then proceeded to melt the thing into their charge port. So again, if you're buying one of these adapters, just make sure you know what you're getting. So, if you have a 48 amp onboard charger, like I believe the Mustang Mach E does, then you're going to want to get at least the 60 amp. You could get the 80 amp as well. So just make sure you know what you're buying, and
Mhm.
you're not going to overload the tools in your toolkit.
Exactly.
Hotels that don't have level 2 charging, um, is that something, have you used level 1 when staying at hotels? Do you not bother? And if you do use level 1, any advice there on how that whole process works?
Sure.
It's also some etiquette in terms of, not draping cords and asking permission and that sort of thing. What's your approach there?
Yeah, so I had a couple of situations where on road trips I needed to use my level one portable Ford charger. And for anyone who doesn't know what that means, a level one, consider the standard outlet in your home. You just plug your vacuum cleaner into or your coffee pot into. Uh, and we had a significant trip. I'll say story number one was our significant trip out to New England, which is much what's pictured in my background. Um, when we stayed in Cape Cod, there was a hotel that we had reserved that had dual J plug chargers, and both were occupied. Um, so I was fine, and I would have been able to figure out charging the next day. But the beauty of an electric vehicle is if you um, delegate your car to charge while you're sleeping, you can accomplish two things, right? Sleep, and you can refuel your body while you refuel your car, right? So they both receive energy overnight. And so anyway, I was too curious that I noticed next to the dual chargers that there was a light pole with a covered standard outlet. And before plugging into it, I went into the hotel and I asked the concierge if I could use that plug. Um, they responded with ignorance, not even knowing that the plug existed there. And then conveniently, manager owner was walking by, and he didn't seem to be too happy that I wanted to talk with him in general. But I I asked him if that plug was available, and he kind of gruffly said, you can use it if you want to. And but I can't guarantee it'll actually work. And so I was like, okay, well, I appreciate your time. I'll go check it out. So I went back outside and I plugged in, and sure enough, it didn't work. But then I realized it was a GFI plug. And so I proceeded to pop the switch, and then it started charging. So I was able to get a little bit of juice overnight. I think I added 30 or 40 miles of range overnight. Um, the stall that I could park in was right next to the light pole, so it didn't inconvenience anyone. So that was really nice. And I guess the second one was our significant trip out to Minnesota. And in Minnesota, the area we were staying at really didn't have any hotels or any lodging with level 2 charging. So I proceeded to go to a hotel that worked for us. And when I went to the concierge, they noticed my Mach E in the front, and the concierge was excited to see a Mach E. She'd never seen one before. And so we started talking about it. But I tried to put on my smooth talking skills, and I said, so I know that I'm looking for a charger, and I'm guessing you probably don't have one, but how can I figure out how to charge my car? And she said, yeah, we don't have any charging, but and we don't have any charging cords, but if you can plug into our power outlet, you can use that. And I said, you have stalls with outlets? And I asked her if they were 110 volt, and she goes, "What's that mean?" And so I pointed down to the wall, and I said, "A plug like that, where you plug your vacuum cleaner." And she says, "Yeah, we have some out there." I said, "Do you know which stalls those are?" And she says, "We know exactly which stalls those are." And so I said, "That's fantastic." So uh, we were out there for 4 days, and they put us in a stall where I could just plug in, and we rolled in with, I think, less than 20% state of charge. And the Ford Pass said, "Well, it was Monday afternoon. Your car's going to be 100% by Thursday at 4." And so,
Hey,
sure enough, we didn't leave till Friday morning, so our car was fully charged by the time we left.
there you go. That's
Nice.
sounds like a use
Nice.
case, almost like long-term parking at an airport, where level 1 totally works out.
Right.
Um, did you offer to pay them at all, or they just didn't care?
I did, and they said you can just plug in, don't worry about
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
So
Well, and that's asking for permission. I mean,
exactly.
the way the math kind of works out, like you said, you add, I don't know, 30 or 40 miles overnight, because you're getting, when you plug into one of those, you're pulling 12 amps. 12 amps is 1440 watts. So 1.5 kilowatts times 10 hours is 15 kilowatt hours, times 3 is 45 miles. So,
Right.
depending on your efficiency of your vehicle, it can be significant. Maybe it's the difference between skipping one fast charger along the way. So
Absolutely.
I think it's worthwhile doing. Maybe just some, like you said, the GFCI is one issue. Some chargers will trip those, so you just got to be careful that you're not doing that.
Yeah.
And then I often offer to pay, and I kind of do the math for them that, for the kind of amounts we're talking about, it's, even if it's 20 or 15, 20 cents per kilowatt hour, which they're probably paying lower commercial rates, you're looking at $2 or $3 in charging costs. And I usually say, if you have a tip jar, I'm happy to throw some money in there. Or if you have a sundry store, I'll, buy something overpriced, and so that you make some profit on this. So that always helps a little bit with, making people feel like they're not getting shafted, or that EV drivers are freeloaders. So
Sure. Well,
yeah.
just to offer, some intentional thought here, on my bucket list is to drive my Mach E out west. I'm originally from Eastern Washington, and the charging infrastructure continues to improve. We've talked about this as a new DCFC has appeared in Michigan City, and that just makes me so excited, because I always stop in Michigan City even with an ICE car. So, um, but it's on my bucket list to go out to Eastern Washington, and when I go out there, I would optimally just charge at my parents' home or with my family. And the Ford Pass tells you exactly how many kilowatt hours you're adding at each session, and it keeps a history of at least the percent of battery. And I can do the math based on the percent of battery that charge was added. And I believe they're paying 9 cents per kilowatt hour, because Washington State electric utility costs are really inexpensive. So, we could be out there for a week, and I would never have to use a DCFC. You know, I'm me driving less than 200 miles in a day, probably when I'm staying out there. So I'll just plug in level one, and then by the end of the week, I say, hey, you know, I use $7 or $10. Can I give this to you? Of course, they're probably going to turn me down. They're like, what a joke. But yeah, I mean, there's obviously etiquette. Energy isn't free. And when you go to a hotel, you're obviously not there free as well. You're paying for services. But there is some etiquette that we should consider where, you know, we do have the benefit of using a little bit more than that's expected.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And I also think when I go to somebody's house, like we have friends where we stay in Kansas City, and I usually ask them, you know, hey, can I just plug in my car in your garage? And one other thing you got to consider is there anything else on those circuits? So I plugged in at a friend of mine's house, and you know, and you can set the amps on many vehicles, especially for the level one. There's usually a setting. I think even on your volt, Larry, right? There's like an 8 amp and a 12 amp
Right.
setting for the
Yeah.
standard household. And the reason for that is you don't want to overload a circuit. Like if it's a little sketchy or so forth, you can go to the lower setting. Now, obviously, that means you're going to get less energy overnight. But one of the things that happened at my friend's house is it turns out he had a refrigerator plugged into that same circuit.
Ah,
And at some point, the refrigerator kicked on, and we were still inside. It was still before we all went to bed. And I got a notification, hey, your car stopped charging. And so we went outside, and sure enough, we had tripped the breaker because between the car pulling a steady current and the refrigerator, the compressor kicking on, that was enough to put the circuit over the edge. And you don't want to ticked off friends with, you know, spoiled meat or blueberries or whatever. So that's just
Right.
something else to kind of watch.
did you have to do that on yours, Luke, on the Mach E? Was how did you have to adjust your amperage pull?
I don't believe there's an option to do that. So if I'm not mistaken, I think it is 12 amps as well. And that's what you get. So thankfully I tripped neither of the plugs that we were using at the time. So but that's really good, you know, something to keep in mind because uh, a tripped breaker on your car is not that big of a deal, but for a refrigerator it is. So
Yeah.
Right. And then the other thing is, you know, most EV chargers, even, or I should say EVSEs, the charge cable, they will tell you don't use extension cords. And so, have you ever used an extension cord?
I have once, and I noticed the cable did get warmer than expected.
Okay.
Um, and probably because the cable wasn't rated for that. It was a one-time situation. I do have another a friend who has a Model Y, and his a 21 Model Y, and he's done many road trips and uses level one um, charging when necessary. But he did advise me, and maybe you guys could also, you know, correct if I'm wrong here, but as long as you get the proper rated extension cable, then
Right.
there are exceptions. And it's a pricier extension cable, but if it's
Right.
rated high enough, then it should work.
Right. Yeah, I think, like I said, if you do the math, 12 amps, 120 volts, 1440 watts. So a lot of cables say rated for 1500, but a lot of them also say rated for 1800. And what I did is I went out and specifically looked for one with 10 gauge wire, which if you do the math or if you look up any kind of, you know, ampacity charts, it could actually handle way more than that, but obviously it's not going to be rated more than what even a 20 amp. So I've carried the 10 gauge cable. The other thing, of course, you want to make sure is that the plugs themselves are plugged in properly, that you don't have any places where it's just like kind of half hanging out, because you need that full contact surface. So it's a good idea to come out maybe like hour later, see, you know, is something getting warm? Are we getting
Right.
dark or melted spots anywhere? Things like that, because you don't want to cause a
And
fire, obviously.
you know, the contractor's extension cords, so the heavy duty, and then they had the lighted ends. So that was another one because, you know, in my scenario with the Volt, when I first got it, just out of, you know, wanting to plug it everywhere I could at friends, you're walking all the way in the extension cord, and it was just nice to see, okay, it's light up, I got power,
Mhm.
so I found that was another spend a little extra money getting a contractor cable, and it has that lighted end. That was a nice bonus, and it's thick.
Right.
I know you're also huge in talking to people. Do you keep any kind of like, I don't know, literature in your car about EVs or anything like that?
Yeah, so I don't mind sharing that. So I'm in the midst of a little bit of a career change right now. So as I'm doing that, I'm doing some rideshare. I've done that for about 7 weeks now, and
Wow.
I've given about 1,000 trips in the last 7 weeks. So we've had a lot of EV conversations. Most are just honestly, most people say that my car is fancy and they love my door handles, which is the lack thereof. It's you open the door with a button. So it seems to
Yeah.
start the conversation off as this is a really cool car. Um, but then it usually goes right over into um, so how much does it cost to charge the car, and or how long does it take to charge the car, and you're just traditionally talking about gas type conversations, and I just share with them honestly. I don't know how long it takes to charge sometimes because many times I'm just going to sleep, and that's being facetious, but I tell them exactly how long it takes, and it depends on your scenario and how much you've driven that day. Um, but I guess I would say that when it comes to EV road tripping, I've told them, I'll drive 250 to 300 miles a day with my Mach E, and my Mach E is only rated for about 200 miles in the current weather conditions, which is we're in the colder months already. So I usually just do one DC fast charging stop just to give myself plenty of juice to continue driving, and I take a lunch break. And I usually have to do something else anyway. I mean, I might even just do a little
Right.
grocery shopping and throw my groceries in the frunk as a little break. So there's always something we need at the store. Um, but the majority of the time, my game is just to get home on empty, and my cheap electricity is at the house. And I try to give them a conversion of what that is. It might be relatively a $1.20, $1.30 per gallon if you're doing the conversion. And they're kind of blown away by that. And I just tell them I go home and I just go in my warm home and I'm done. I don't have to mess with a cold handle and wait out in the cold. And I just get to be with family. And so I guess with regard to road tripping, though, I was thinking about this. We do this podcast is a lot of people get worried about doing a road trip because you don't know where the charges are at, and you're concerned about finding those places. But the cars are equipped with great tech, and they're equipped with a lot of tech in your hands where you can just look to see what your trip is going to be like. And honestly, you should be doing that with any vehicle you do. Um, I mean, we live in America where people traveled, early 1800s and traveled across the country, but they didn't just do that willy-nilly. They kind of did, but they had a lot of pre-planning and thought involved. And I think we've been, how do I say this? Maybe cursed with too much convenience, where we can just go and be done. And so I say, just add 10% forethought and thinking about where you're going to go. I mean, even if you do a road trip to grandmother's house or to aunt and uncle's house, you usually already know where you're going to stop anyway. And you plan on maybe stopping there because that's where they have the best hot dog or best French fries or whatever, and you're going to get some gas too. So you do the same thing with electric vehicles. There are fewer of them, but you'd be surprised. There's actually some pretty good amenities around those too. So just put a little forethought, and then even if you get going, your car says, "Hey, do you want to go to this one just a little bit further down the road?" And you're like, "You know what? Maybe I do want to check out that one further down the road." And you just charge there instead, and then you've found a new spot to charge at. So now you have multiple spots in your head as you pre-plan.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Right.
I know there are a lot more chargers now than there were when I first came to Michigan in 2018. So now we were at the point you actually have a choice. We just did a ribbon cutting down in Spring Lake, and that's a great location just because of, there are stores nearby, there are restaurants nearby. Um, when I first used to pass through Lansing, there was one Tesla supercharger, and now there's a second one, and the second one is at a Meyer store. And I happen to like that because I don't want to always eat out. So I go in there and I go in the bakery and I get a baguette and I get some fancy, meats or something like that. And that's actually my preference. Or like you said, I'm a coffee guy, so I'm always looking for a place that has, craft coffees, things like that. So we're getting to the point where
And
you can make those changes, you can make those choices.
wouldn't you think too that it's going to accelerate? There's even going to be more popping up than ever before, right? Just the way everything's going.
I do see a lot more ribbon cuttings, like the one in Spring Lake, the Red E network. They've popped up quite a few recently, and the people that work for Red E, my experience at least, is they're EV drivers, so they kind of get it. So I think we're also kind of moving away from this. Somebody just randomly put some DC fast or even a level 2 charger in some place that's really, awful, that you would never send your wife or your daughter. We're getting much better at how that's thought out. So yeah, and quite a few more of them, Larry. That's true.
Yeah, and I recall, as we get further down this road, I think next year, if it still exists, Travel Centers of America and Electrify America, I think partnered together so that every travel center has an Electrify America station, and I think the more that we see that partnership, it will help to create a better standard, as you've also pointed out in other posts, Carl, about pull through and covered
Yeah.
DC fast charging. So I do have a colleague friend who works at Meyer Corporate, and we're hearing of more Myers, putting in DCFC. We've had a really great experience at Hudsonville. I've charged them many times, and it's always been a great experience. And the Meyer there is a great location. Plus, there's other fast food locations within walking distance. So, and now we see that in Michigan City, and soon enough, probably in Northwest Grand Rapids. So probably by next year, who knows? So
Yeah.
Right. And you're setting your intention like a treasure hunt. People pay to go on treasure hunts. You just buy an electric car and you get to every day, maybe discover a new charger somewhere. So it's kind of exciting.
well, and I would say too, I was at the ribbon cutting with Carl in Spring Lake, and when you spoke, Carl, about EV drivers just going to a spot to check out a charger and now getting to know the community, that is true. And so I don't think there's ever been anyone with a gas vehicle says, I want to go check out this town because of that gas station. But that station, the Ford chargers, and just the way that screen and the infotainment, it's not really infotainment, but it feels like infotainment to me with all the information coming through. And then of course behind you is just beautiful scenery. That is another ideal DCFC, because I wouldn't expect to see one in that kind of location. So I'm glad we have that in our backyard.
Yeah. And fun fact, we'll have to talk about this another time, but there's a Ready app now, and I didn't know that until we had the ribbon cutting. So far, Ready has had the web-based QR code type interface, and one of their employees who does kind of the back office programming said, "Oh yeah, we have an app, but don't talk about it yet because we're releasing a new version that's going to be like super cool." But already, you can download that and you can see which stations are active and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm loving what's happening there. And you mentioned the travel centers. Flying J is another one that I've had very good success with. They're partnering with EVgo, again, covered spots, Denny's restaurant, any amenities you could want. So and I don't know if you've seen the news, but Buc-ee's down south partnering with Mercedes.
Right.
So some really, really cool stuff happening in the travel world. All right, gentlemen, thanks for the talk. And to our listeners, hope you got a couple of nuggets out of here for your upcoming road trips for Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever holiday you celebrate around the end of the year. And thanks, and we'll catch you next time.
Good to have you again, Luke. That was awesome.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Carl.
Take care. If you enjoyed or learned from this episode of Zero E Michigan, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Visit our YouTube channel for other related videos at youtube.com/@0E-Michigan.